Have you ever wondered how many extraordinary stories pass us by every day without us noticing? How many people do we judge with our eyes without knowing the weight they carry in their chests? She lived on the street, invisible to everyone, until someone from the past stopped the car right in front of her. Most people quickened their pace. They pretended not to see. They crossed the street. She was just one of so many faces lost on the sidewalk, wrapped in torn blankets, her gaze distant, her lips chapped from the cold. But that afternoon, something different happened. As the traffic light closed, she sat on the same corner where time seemed to have stopped. And it was there, in that ordinary moment, that destiny decided to break the silence of his life. A car stopped. The window was lowered. And then, she saw it. Her heart almost stopped. He wasn't just a familiar face. This was someone who was part of a life she thought was buried forever. For a moment, everything froze. The noise of the city, the hurried footsteps, the horns around, everything disappeared. It was just the two of them. She, covered in dust and pain. He, clean, perfumed, staring as if he had seen a ghost. Can you imagine what she felt at that moment? Years of silence, abandonment, shame, hunger, all mixed with the memory of a time when she was still someone. When I had a name, a future, dreams. When I still believed in love. Who was he? What did he do? And more importantly, what was he about to do? This story is not about charity. It's about reunions. It's about the power of being seen, even when the entire world chooses to look away. What happened next is impossible to predict. But one thing is certain, neither of them would leave the same way. This story is urgent. It shows what no one wants to see: abandonment, pain, and the strength of those who continue, even without having anything left. Liking this video is more than a gesture, it's affirming that stories like this need to be told. Subscribe to the channel and closely follow each reunion, each new beginning, each truth that the world insists on ignoring. Now get ready, what comes next will leave a deep impression on you. Luana, 32 years, a name that could be that of any ordinary woman. But her life stopped being ordinary a long time ago. Anyone who sees her sitting on the cold sidewalk, surrounded by plastic bags, worn clothes, and a thin blanket, cannot imagine the story behind that blank look. For 2 years, Luana has lived on the streets. And the street, contrary to what many people think, is not just about the absence of a roof. It's the absence of everything. It's being alive without being noticed. It's screaming inside while the world moves quickly, looking away. Her childhood was marked by long silences and profound absences. He grew up in a house where affection was a rare commodity, where the most common words were "swallow your tears" and "don't bother me." He never knew his father. Mom worked all day, and at night she collapsed in exhaustion and frustration. The affection that she didn't have at home, Luana sought outside, too soon, with the wrong people. At 18, she fell in love with an older man who seemed like everything she never had: protection, attention, affection. At first, he made her feel special. But little by little, affection became control. The praise turned to criticism. "I love you" became a veiled threat. Luana stopped being her. He left his studies. She moved away from her friends. He broke up with his mother. All in the name of a love that was turning into a prison. When he lost his job, the attacks began, first verbal, then physical. Fear silenced Luana's voice every night. She believed she had nowhere to go, that no one would listen to her. And in fact, no one listened. Until the day when, covered in bruises and despair, she decided to run away. He took a backpack with 2 clothes, a broken cell phone, and 20 reis in his pocket. He walked out the door without looking back. But on the outside, there was no fresh start waiting for her. There was the street. Cold, indifferent, merciless. He lost what little he had. He slept on park benches, ordered food from bakeries. She cried silently under awnings as the rain fell, as if complicit in the pain that crushed her. Every day on the streets erased a piece of the Luana that existed. Over time, he learned to disappear. She learned that remaining invisible was safer than trying to be seen. People passed by it every day. Some threw coins without looking. Others crossed the street. There were those who cursed her for being there, as if the street was a choice, not a desperation. And then came the looks that hurt the most, the ones that crossed her body as if she didn't exist. The world seemed to operate on a frequency where it was no longer picked up. It was as if she had been deleted from real life. On 2 particularly cold nights, Luana believed she wouldn't wake up. I couldn't feel my hands anymore. My legs ached as if every muscle was asking for a break. But still, even when everything screamed an end, she continued. Maybe out of stubbornness, maybe out of hope, or perhaps by instinct, the same instinct that keeps a heart beating even when the soul is tired of fighting. Still, in the midst of all this, there was one detail that never changed. It always stayed on the same corner. Every day, I returned to that spot. It was as if there was a kind of attachment, a feeling that even she couldn't explain. It was a busy corner where cars stopped at the lights, right in front of an old pharmacy. Some faces there were already familiar. 1 or 2 drivers who always passed at that time. But no one ever stopped. Nobody ever cared. Until that day. That day a black car slowed down, in which the window was lowered. When his gaze met hers. But before I tell you what happened when that car stopped, and what it meant in Luana's life, we need to understand what abandonment does to a person. Not just physical abandonment, but emotional abandonment. The psychological, the social. Because when someone is abandoned by everyone, including themselves, all that's left is raw pain. The pain that doesn't ask permission, doesn't have a time, doesn't need sound. The pain that lives in the eyes, in the silence, in the automatic gestures of those who have become accustomed to not expecting anything from anyone anymore. Luana stopped talking to people. Her voice became hoarse, weak, as if it was no longer useful. But inside her there were still memories. Memories of when I dreamed of being a teacher, when I danced alone in my room with old headphones and imagined an audience applauding. Memories of the smell of a new notebook, of passionate notes as a teenager, of the time she heard from the school principal, "You have a future, girl." These memories appeared at the most unexpected moments, as the brain's defense against the harshness of reality. And at that moment, when the car stopped and the window started to roll down, her heart accelerated like it hadn't done in a long time. Because the face she saw wasn't just familiar. It was the face of someone who was once part of the life she lost. This type of story moves us, because it's not fiction. She talks about real traumas, from abusive relationships, of social abandonment, and a reunion that, although unlikely, has the power to rekindle a light, showing that not every story ends where the pain begins. And that's why this video exists, because stories like this need to be told. They help give a voice to those who have been silenced, giving a face to those who have been erased, making sure that, even for a few minutes, no one feels alone in their own pain. And now, with an open heart, it's time to delve into what happened when the past stopped right there, in front of her. Because sometimes, all a life needs to change is an instant. She heard footsteps moving away, but no one stopped. The sound of her soles on the wet asphalt was almost a constant soundtrack in the early morning she faced. There was something cruelly symbolic about hearing so many feet leaving. They were the same feet that, one day, might have run alongside her in a schoolyard, danced at parties, walked beside her on sunny days. But here, in the dirty, dark present of his existence, every step meant only one thing: rejection. It was dawn again. The same corner, the same hard concrete beneath the body, the same damp blanket that seemed less and less able to protect from the freezing wind. Luana was shaking. It wasn't just the cold. It felt like I was rotting from the inside. The dry skin began to open wounds. His stomach ached silently, empty for days. And the eyes, oh, the eyes weren't crying anymore. They had learned to swallow their tears. She looked at the lit windows, open pharmacies, 24-hour bakeries, convenience stores, and everything seemed to belong to another world. A world where people bought things, laughed, talked on the cell phone, made plans. A world she knew, but now seemed unreachable. As if there was an invisible wall between her and everything that seemed simple, common, everyday. Sometimes I heard random phrases from passers-by: "You have to work, not be there begging, must be a user, look at the danger, cross quickly." Each sentence, like a cut. Sharp words spoken by mouths that never asked your name. The judgment came quickly, accurately, mercilessly. Because it's easier to point the finger than to reach out. It's more comfortable to believe that someone on the street is there by choice than to face the truth. Anyone can fall. All it takes is one wrong sequence of events. All it takes is an absence at the right time. A love that destroys. A family that turns its back. A crisis that arrives without warning. Luana didn't fall overnight. It was a slow collapse, a series of small withdrawals that, together, formed the abyss. She tried. He looked for shelter. He tried temporary work, knocked on doors. But there was always something that pulled her back to the bottom: the lack of documents, the prejudice, the mental exhaustion, and, above all, the feeling that no one believed in her anymore. When no one believes, we stop believing too. At the bottom of the torn backpack he was carrying, there was a blue notebook. In it, he kept old pages, some words written in pencil, loose sentences. One day, she wanted to be a teacher. I dreamed of teaching children to read, to write, to dream. She clearly remembered the time she organized the school library with such care that the principal praised her in front of the class. "You have a knack for this, Luana. You'll go far." These words were preserved. They were the fuel for many years. But there, on the hard sidewalk, they seemed like a distant delirium, an echo of who she once was. What no one saw was that, even in that condition, Luana still maintained a trace of who she once was. He organized his few things with almost ritual care. He folded the blanket, separated the papers. He wrote words when he could get a pencil. As if, in the midst of dirt, hunger and abandonment, it was necessary to preserve some dignity. A memory of herself. The nights were the worst, not just because of the cold, but because of the fears. The fear of someone approaching, the fear of being attacked, the fear of not waking up. I had heard too many stories from women like her. Some disappeared. Others were raped, taken, erased. Therefore, he kept a stone next to his body. A piece of concrete he called his companion. It didn't make sense, but it gave him some false sense of protection. And there was the fear of being forgotten completely. Because being forgotten is worse than dying. It's knowing that the world has moved on, and that you are no longer part of it. The days also offered no respite. The sun burned the cracked skin. Fatigue made the body heavier than normal. Trash piled up all around. The smell of food coming from the restaurants hurt my stomach. And the conversations she heard from people in queues, on corners, in cars, only reinforced that she no longer belonged there. It was like watching life from the outside, with no right of entry. And yet, something inside her still resisted. A very small but stubborn piece, who refused to die completely. That bit lit up when she remembered school. Afternoons of reading, from a boy named Raphael, who wrote a note and left it in her pencil case. When you smile, it seems like the world becomes beautiful. She kept that paper for years. Until, on the run, he lost everything. But the note remained engraved in my memory, as a reminder that at some point, she made the world look beautiful to someone. And that's exactly what made her freeze when the black car stopped. She knew that car. Or better yet, I knew the look behind the glass. His heart beat hard, almost uncontrollably, after being asleep for so long. The face that appeared there, when the window came down, was not that of a stranger. It was someone who was part of that past where she still believed in love. Someone who had already held his hand, who had already made promises. His eyes widened, hers lowered, overcome with shame. Because, in that second, the full weight of who she was now collided head-on with the memory of who she once was. It was as if two Luanas met at that moment, the dreamy girl and the broken woman. And that's where you come in. By commenting here, you help keep this story alive. Because your comment is a way of giving a voice to those who no one listens to. Sharing a memory, a thought, an emotion that this story brought you, is a gesture of empathy. It's saying, I saw it. I felt it. It means keeping an open dialogue about what the world insists on hiding under the carpet: pain, abandonment, unlikely new beginnings. And yes, there is more to come. Because this reunion is not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. The car stopped slowly. The engine noise seemed louder than usual on that quiet corner. The red light forced the city to wait for a few seconds, seconds that seemed suspended in time. Luana looked up on impulse, as she did whenever a car stopped there. But this time, something inside her stopped. The air caught in my throat. A shiver ran across his skin. Her eyes met other eyes, and she recognized. The glass lowered with a subtle sound, and the world around her, for an instant, seemed to dissolve. There were no horns, there was no sound of footsteps, there was no constant cold that had cut into his skin for days. There was only that face before her. A face that he knew every detail of his past, but that he would never have imagined seeing in the present, even more so there, on the other side of the street, inside a clean car, with the steering wheel in his hands and a look full of surprise. It was him, Raphael. The same kind expression, the same way he frowned when he was confused or nervous. Time had left marks on his face, but it hadn't erased the features that were part of the best days of Luana's youth. It was with him that she experienced her first true love, the first kiss, the first promise of the future. When they were together, she felt like she could do anything, that it wasn't just the daughter of the bitter woman who worked too much, that she wasn't just the girl from the forgotten neighborhood of the city. With Raphael, she felt whole, loved. But life took care of separating the two. In silent ways, like so many breakups happen, he left with his family for another state. They lost contact, as if time had thrown sand over their history. Luana moved on, or at least tried, and I never heard from him again. Until now. She turned her face away, trying to hide the impact. The instinct was shame. How to face someone who knew her when she smiled for nothing, when she made plans, when she believed that the world was possible. How could she allow him to see her like this, with her dirty face, her lips cracked, her blouse torn, sitting on the city floor like someone who had given up on everything? But he didn't dodge. He didn't move forward like the others. The car stopped, the window down, and he watched her with a mixture of amazement and pain, as if he recognized her but couldn't believe what he was seeing. His eyes said more than any words could. They were full of questions, of memories, of guilt perhaps. And hers were filled with silence. Because at that moment, there was no possible explanation for everything that separated her from the image he kept of her. He saw the girl she was and the woman the world crushed, all at the same time, in a single glance. And she saw herself through his eyes, and that was more painful than any cold night. Because the pain of being ignored was already known. But the pain of being recognized in the state she was in, that was new. Deep. Raw. It was as if all the internal wounds gained a voice, a light. As if the past knocked on the door of your misery and said, I know who you were. I remember you happy. He called her by name, low, almost as if he didn't want to scare her. But the sound of that name, her name spoken tenderly, was like an explosion inside his chest. How long has it been since anyone said Luana with affection? How long had she been called just hey, girl, or get out of here? She didn't respond. He just looked at him again. For seconds that seemed like hours, they stayed there, two worlds separated by a car window. He hesitated. I wanted to get off, but the light changed. Horns behind him pressured him, but he didn't start. He pulled over the car and turned off the engine. It went down slowly. It was at that moment that her heart screamed louder than pride, shame, fear. Because there, standing before her, was someone who didn't just represent the past. He was a living reminder that she was once loved, that there was a Luana with sparkle in her eyes and the smell of cheap shampoo. A Luana who wrote dreams on folded paper, who laughed at silly jokes, who talked about having a simple house with a balcony and a blackboard in the living room. Raphael bent down. It was at her height. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't ask questions, just looked. And his gaze had something that no one else showed, respect. She cried. No sound. No despair. Just clean tears running down the dirt on his face. And he remained there. As if saying, without words, that he was in no hurry, that he was willing to listen, that, even without understanding everything, he wanted to know where the Luana he knew had gotten lost. And at that moment, something began to crack inside her. It wasn't pain. It was something else. A slight crack, as if the concrete that had hardened his chest was beginning to give way. A thread of heat piercing the eternal cold. The beginning of something she still couldn't name. But I felt it, like a memory being rescued. And there, in the midst of the traffic, the rush, the indifference of the city, a moment of pause appeared. Presence, of reunion. Something was about to change. Raphael remained silent for a few seconds, standing there, next to the car. His eyes covered every detail of what he saw in front of him, but without sensationalism, without judgment. There was something in his eyes that seemed to apologize for having disappeared, for not being there before, for not knowing what time had done to Luana. She, on the other hand, didn't hold his gaze. He lowered his eyes. He turned his face away. The movement was quick, automatic, like someone trying to hide within their own skin. The defense instinct was stronger than the desire to relive any good memory. She knew he recognized her. It was written all over his face. But I didn't want to see compassion, or surprise, or pity. Mainly pity. Shame was like an anchor tied around his neck. It weighed down, suffocated, trapped. Because when someone who has seen you at your best meets you at your worst, there is no place to hide. Luana wanted to disappear. I wanted to disappear at that moment. The silence between them lasted longer than seemed bearable. The dilemma was written all over Raphael's face. Part of him wanted to respect that space, that silence that said everything. The other part was fighting the urge to do something, to help, to understand, to touch, even if it was with words. His eyes revealed a turmoil, anger at himself for disappearing, impotence for not knowing what to say, a knot in his chest for seeing there, on the street, the girl who was once his entire world. He took a step back. He hesitated. He looked again at Luana, who was still looking away. The light, back there, had already opened and closed several times. The world went on, as it always does, without caring about stories like this. But Raphael stayed. Because at that moment he understood that he couldn't just go on. You couldn't go back to the car, put it in gear and pretend you didn't see it. Because he saw it. And when we really see it, something inside us changes. He walked away. He returned to the car. Luana, cowering, believed he was leaving. The sound of the door closing was like a punch. She squeezed her eyes shut, as if trying to push the pain inside, suffocate what she feels before it overflows. But instead of starting the car, Raphael did the opposite. He opened the trunk, looked through some things. He took out a folded blanket. It was clean, still in the plastic. He walked over to her again and, without saying anything, crouched down and carefully placed the blanket next to her. She still hasn't looked. But he felt it. She felt the gesture pierce through the barrier of shame that had enveloped her for so long. He felt that that blanket was not just an object. It was a presence, a connection attempt, of respect. Raphael didn't insist. He didn't say anything. He returned to the car once again. She thought he would leave now. But he just got in, started the engine and left slowly, without rushing. She saw him leave out of the corner of her eyes. And even though he tried to contain it, a tear escaped. It wasn't just the gesture. It was what he woke up for, a living memory that one day she was cared for, important, loved. The next morning, when the sun was still shy and the first cars were passing by, he returned. It stopped in the same place. He didn't speak. He didn't press. He just handed her a bag of food, a simple snack, a juice. She hesitated. He looked at him, and, for the first time, their eyes met again. There was no demand in his eyes, just presence. She took the bag with shaking hands. He whispered a barely audible thank you. And in that almost invisible gesture, a bigger crack formed in the wall that separated her from the world. He didn't try to talk that day. It only stayed for a few minutes, sitting on the curb, a few meters away from her. Without looking directly, but being there, as if to say, I'm not leaving. In the following days, he returned. Always at the same time. Always with something. a hot coffee, a soap, a notebook and a pen, and she, little by little, stopped hiding. He started talking, first, a few words, then, short sentences, until, one day, the conversation took off. She talked about everything, from childhood, from the mother, from the escape, from the ex, from the street, of the nights of fear, of hopeless mornings, and he listened, without interrupting, without trying to fix it, just listened. The most surprising thing is that, even in the face of her pain, Raphael showed no mercy. It showed recognition. As if, there, sitting on the floor, he still saw the same girl who danced barefoot in her room, who spoke loudly when she got excited, who dreamed of teaching children to read. And that look, that of someone who still sees something valuable where the world only sees misery, was the greatest offer he could make. Because, in that look, Luana began to see herself again. You started to remember. Not of everything he lost, but of everything he could still find. And it doesn't take much to understand what was happening there. This wasn't just a daily visit. It was a return of humanity. It was a silent rescue. A constant presence saying, you still matter. And when someone believes in you, even when you've already given up, something changes. Something rebuilds itself. Little by little, Luana began to wait for him. Not with anxiety, but with the feeling that there was, finally, a breakthrough. A possibility, a chance, and it was on this silent frequency that they followed. A leisurely exchange. A reconstruction made of small but profound gestures. Because transformation doesn't always start with big words. Sometimes it starts with a clean blanket and a look that doesn't look away. In the days that followed, Raphael kept coming back. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because something inside him had awakened, perhaps the same feeling that she awakened when they were 17 years old and spent hours talking about the future sitting on the sidewalk in front of the school. But now the time was different, the scenario was different, and the pain had shaped everything in a harder, rawer, quieter way. He always arrived at the same time, carrying something simple in his hands, a meal, a piece of soap, a clean coat, but what he really offered was presence. In a world where everyone was in a hurry, where eyes were averted, where indifference was the rule, Raphael was there. Every day. And this constancy gradually lit a spark within Luana. Small, weak, but real. A reminder that there was still human warmth. That someone still saw value in her. Little by little, she began to trust. Telling small pieces of your story. First, loose facts, short sentences, like someone testing words after a long time in silence. But Raphael didn't force it. He listened. And listening, there, was an act of love. As the days went by, the conversations grew longer. Luana spoke about her difficult childhood, the wounds that didn't heal, the abusive relationship that destroyed her self-esteem, the shame of asking for help, the fear of being judged. He spoke from rock bottom, of the early mornings when I wished I wouldn't wake up. And every time she spoke, it was like a weight was lifted from within, as if each sentence spoken was one less stone on your back. Raphael heard everything, and when he heard it, he thought that it couldn't end there, that woman, full of pain and stories, deserved a new chance. And that's when he did what many wouldn't do, he sought help. He looked for an NGO he knew, an entity that worked to rescue homeless people, with a focus on women. It was a small organization, but with a big soul. People who did not promise miracles, but offered dignity, care, listening, and structure. Carefully, Raphael presented the idea to Luana. He didn't insist, but he made it clear it was an opportunity. A clean place, a bed, 3 meals a day, psychological care, clothes, a hot bath, and, most important of all, respect. Luana hesitated. Fear still held her by the wrist. She had heard promises before. I had already fallen into traps, but Raphael's eyes didn't lie, and something inside her wanted to try. Maybe for him, maybe for herself. The following week, she got into that car. For the first time in years, he sat in a passenger seat, not to run away, but to follow. The path to the shelter was silent, but full of emotion. Every kilometer was like a piece of the street she left behind. And, at the same time, the beginning of a new journey, uncertain, yes, but possible. Once there, she was greeted by a social worker with sweet eyes. Her name was Helena. He had a firm and welcoming manner, like someone who has seen everything but still believes in people. He showed the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. He explained the rules lovingly, but firmly. And he said the phrase that Luana would never forget: "Here, no one needs to prove anything. They just need to want to stay." The first few nights were difficult. Luana couldn't sleep well. Accustomed to the noise of the street, to the constant insecurity, the silence of the shelter seemed too strange. But over time, the body began to understand that it was safe there. And the heart, well, the heart started to open. She started to take care of herself, taking a shower calmly, eating regularly, listening to the psychologist's advice. He had emotional relapses. She cried many times without knowing exactly why. But each tear was like an internal cleaning, a sign that she was coming back to you. He started participating in conversation circles and activities offered by the center. And in one of those conversations, I said out loud for the first time in years, I wanted to be a teacher. Helena wrote that down. Raphael found out. And that's how a new door opened. The NGO offered a scholarship for a supplementary course. Luana went back to studying. He sat down on a chair, opened a notebook, picked up a pencil. And something inside her clicked. It was like coming home. The words, the numbers, the texts, everything rekindled the Luana she believed she had lost. And Raphael, he was there every step of the way. Accompanying, encouraging, respecting her rhythm, never demanding gratitude, just being supportive. Months passed. Time, the same thing that had been cruel so many times, was now an ally. Luana completed the supplement. He took a training course for social educators, offered by the NGO. And after a year, there she was, standing in front of a group of street children. Children who looked at her with attentive eyes, hungry not only for food, but for affection, for guidance, for hope. Luana, now, was the teacher she once dreamed of being. But it was more than that. It was a living example that pain does not define destiny. That it is possible to start over, even after having been forgotten by everyone. That a story doesn't end at rock bottom. Sometimes, that's where it really begins. The reunion with Raphael was the trigger. But the real miracle was internal. It was she who chose to allow herself. She was the one who agreed to look at herself with less guilt and more compassion. She was the one who decided that, even though she was broken, she was still whole enough to make a difference in other people's lives. And each class she taught, each child who listened to her, it was as if her past was given new meaning. Every word taught was a cure. Each story shared was a bridge between pain and love. And this is not the end. Neither from the story, nor from Luana. It's just another turning point. Because when someone believes in themselves again, the impossible becomes just the beginning. It was impressive how time had given that corner a new meaning. The same piece of sidewalk where Luana cowered from the cold, where she spent sleepless nights trying to protect her body and soul from absolute abandonment, now seemed like another place. Not because the concrete had changed, not because the city had become kinder, but because inside her, something had been transformed. There, where one day he believed that his story would end without glory, without goodbyes, without even a memory, right there, life decided to start again. Passing through that place after everything he had experienced was like crossing a bridge of memories. Every inch of the street held a trace of what it once was. The hard floor was still there. The pole was still flashing faulty. The smell of the bakery on the corner still mixed with the pollution on the avenue. But now, Luana was no longer the invisible woman. Now, she was standing there, with firm steps, face up, bag over shoulder, a bundle of school activity papers in hand and a group of children running in front of him, calling his name with joy. Yes, her name, Luana, now said with respect, with affection, with gratitude, a name that once again had weight, which was remembered again. Every day, after classes, she made a point of accompanying the little ones to the meeting point with the NGO volunteers. It was part of the routine, but it was also a way to honor her own journey. And, from time to time, as she rounded the corner, she would stop for a few seconds. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, not as someone who mourns, but as someone who gives silent thanks. There was rock bottom, but it was also the place where Raphael stopped the car. The place where she saw herself reflected in eyes that didn't give up on her. The exact point where she understood that there was still something to be lived. And more than that there was still someone behind all the dirt, the pain, the silence. The reunion with Raphael was what many might call a coincidence, but Luana knew it wasn't. It was as if the universe had given her back a lost piece of herself. But the real reunion, that was with herself. With that version of himself that had been buried by fear, by guilt, by abandonment. Meeting Raphael brought back memories, but finding herself again was what saved her. Now, she was no longer ashamed of what she experienced. It carried learning, and this learning was passed on every day in conversations with the children he accompanied. Many of them with similar stories, many without anyone. And, in every look she met, she saw a part of the girl she once was. And she promised herself that none of them would go through life thinking they didn't deserve to be seen. She knew how much it hurt to be ignored. And that's why he made a point of looking each child in the eye, calling them by name, listening to them. Because what she hadn't had in many years, she was now able to offer presence. Raphael was still present. The two did not resume a loving relationship, at least not in the way they had lived in their youth. But there was a deep connection between them, a solid friendship, a respect so great that it needed no definition. They were a haven for each other. And that was enough. Sometimes, he would pick her up at the end of the day, and they would walk together to the bookstore that she loved so much. Other times, they would have lunch in the square where they used to talk as teenagers. And they laughed at themselves, at life, at the time that has passed. Luana smiled again, but not that automatic smile, made to please others. It was a smile that was born from the soul, from within, that carried marks, but also pride. The kind of smile that only exists when someone rises from the depths and builds a new version of themselves with their own hands. And the most beautiful thing was to see that, despite everything she had experienced, she did not harden. She didn't become bitter or cynical. On the contrary, it became a shelter. A woman who knew how to welcome, who had true empathy, who understood, without judgment, what it meant to fail, to fall, to want to disappear. And precisely for this reason, he knew how to delicately guide those who were trying to start over. It was there, on that corner where everything seemed to have ended, that new stories now began. Rescued children, lives rebuilt, transformed destinies, and Luana was part of that. An essential part, not as a survivor, but as a bridge. As someone who had the courage to go through their own pain and come back with their hands outstretched. With every step he took, he left marks of hope. With every word he said, he sowed possible futures. And with every look he received back, he reaffirmed a certainty: no one is truly lost when there is still someone willing to see beyond appearances, seeing what was erased, reaching out even when the whole world turned away. And it was there, exactly there, on that cold and forgotten sidewalk, at that point where she thought so many times she would die, that her life began again. Not because the world has changed, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone actually saw her. And, from that look, she also saw herself again. Sometimes, all we need is for someone to really see us. This story touched where ordinary words cannot reach. When someone goes through rock bottom and finds their own essence, there is no way to emerge unscathed. Emotions like these need to continue circulating, reaching other people, awakening deep reflections. This channel delivers narratives that not only entertain, but transform. Stories made with soul, for those who feel too much, for those who live intensely, for those who recognize the value of pain and overcoming. Sign up now and always be among the first to live these experiences that few have the courage to tell about. And whoever got this far carries something special. It carries sensitivity, presence, truth. Comment below, I see you. This is the kind of message that builds bridges, that validates, that connects. Writing this is leaving A silent but powerful milestone, it is saying, I am here, and I continue to believe. With each story told here, a new door opens. What comes next carries even more intensity, more hidden layers, more truths ready to be revealed. The next chapter of this journey is ready to find those who feel, those who listen with their hearts, and those who see beyond appearances. There is something coming that provokes, excites, and changes perspectives. Anyone who is already here is already part of this. Get ready to feel even more, because what's to come deserves to be experienced from start to finish. This video marks a new beginning, not only for the story told here, but also for this channel. After a while of silence, the narratives return with even more strength, more truth, more emotion. This is not just a resumption, it is a new cycle, made for those who feel intensely and value every detail of a well-told story. With each new video, more than just stories, this channel delivers reunions with what makes us human. The journey has started again, and whoever got here is already part of it.